So it's just past 10:45. I'm going to do a quick hop in here and say good morning, everybody. I'm Meg Winnicates, Director of Engagement for NEMA. Happy to see you here for conference day 2, and we're really excited to have Carole and Suzi here. So before we get the session started, we just have a quick word from the sponsor for today's session, which is our fabulous sponsors from Collector Systems. So hang on one second, and we will have their video here, and then I will turn it over to Carole and Suzi. Whoops. It feels like I have the wrong window selected. Nope, there it is. Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great session.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So great to see you. Let's get my presentation going here. Give me a yes in the chat just to make sure that you can see what I need you to see there. Today we're talking about, yes, thank you guys, leadership at all levels. And this session is for your professional development. So many sessions here at the conference are about serving your visitors better, improving your organizations, and all that, of course, is really important. But I love coming to NEMA because I love to give you all something to think about your own professional skills and your career development, and really take some time to focus on that. You are all incredible, mission-driven professionals, and you want to have a big impact. And sometimes leadership can get in the way of those ambitions. And we're going to talk about how that works today. Especially in museums, we have this idea of leadership as the person at the top who's making decisions, who makes the calls, who sets the course. And museums tend to be hierarchical in structure and really reinforce that idea. But I know that there are so many of you who are talented, insightful, you have innovative ideas, and you're mid-level or emerging professionals who are ready to take on higher level positions and leadership. And right now, a lot of positions are not open. Those higher level positions aren't open. And so you want to be developing your skills and having a leadership impact now. And so today we're going to talk about how you can do that. So we're going to talk about what leadership can look like when you're not at the top of the organization. And that we is me. I'm Carole. I'm a strategic career coach, and I'm the founder of Penney Leadership. And my mission is to help you to navigate your work with purpose and resilience. I work with mission-driven professionals from all sectors and all industries, but I particularly love working with museum professionals because that's how I started my career. I was an AmeriCorps member at the Providence Children's Museum in Rhode Island. And so museum people are my people, and that has really framed the whole way that I think about my career. So I've been a certified professional coach for 8 years, and I help people to think about their meaningful career paths and their authentic leadership. And I'm so excited to be here today with Suzi. Suzi, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Suzi Fonda, and I have been a museum professional for the last almost 20 years. I've worked in 5 different museums across the Northeast, including most recently at Plymouth Plantation, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and the Concord Museum. I am currently, as I like to describe it, on sabbatical, working on trying to figure out my next move. And I first met Carole almost exactly a year ago at the NEMA conference, back when we used to be able to, see actual people at the conference up in Vermont last year. And I'm incredibly excited about this topic of leadership. For me, I've done a lot of work with Carole, and through that, I've been able to develop my own mission statement, which is to inspire others to engage with art, history, and culture in order to cultivate a sense of empathy and belonging and promote critical thinking about the world. So I'm so glad to be here and so glad to talk about this, to engage in conversation with Carole with all of you about this important topic.
Yay. Yeah. Thanks, Suzi. We started talking about this because we were working together after meeting last year and having a lot of great conversations about your role in leadership in museums and developing your leadership path. And so it led to a lot of conversations about what's going on in the museum field and what the needs are, especially because you and I were coaching together right at the beginning of the pandemic and seeing the field really shift. And so we wanted to come together to put this session forward so that I could bring you some tools and resources and mindsets to think about, and Suzi can reflect on her experience with really applying this to the museum field. We want this to be really interactive, so I see you guys are already hopping in the chat, which is great. Keep it coming. Want to hear what's sticking with you, what questions you have. Don't be shy. Go ahead and pitch in there. So I want to start just by painting a picture of myself as a young professional early in my career. And I'm wondering if any of you can relate to this. I was really mission driven. I discovered working in nonprofits and feeling like really making a difference and doing purposeful work really resonated with me. I was low on the totem pole. I was entry level in an organization where the director had been there for almost 30 years. And that person really set the tone, as all leaders do, for the organization. And I was, looking up to everyone in the organization and feeling like I had ideas, I had passion to apply, I had all of this, this energy and drive, and also a call to leadership. But there were a lot of things that I hit up against a brick wall. I felt frustrated when my ideas couldn't go through. I felt stuck underneath this hierarchical structure. And I felt like a lot of what was happening in the organization was completely out of my control. Who am I? I'm just this little minion at the bottom of this pyramid. And meanwhile, looking around at the leaders, and I felt like I could point out a lot of their flaws, as we all do. We expect our leaders to be perfect, and we're very aware when they're not. And so I felt like I could point out these shortfalls and say, well, this is how I would do it different, or they should be doing this, or they should be doing that. And as I progressed in my career, there was a lot of this going on, just feeling like I'm not at that leadership level, so I can't be making decisions. I'm at the effect of what's going on. And so what do you do when that happens? You complain to your husband, your friend, your partner. I commiserated with my colleagues, which often led to this sort of like downward spiral or a bitch fest, which is just not productive and didn't get us anywhere. And it had an impact on my sense of motivation, my ability to sustain my passion, my performance at work, and even my health. I'm sure that some of you can relate that our health suffers when we're not feeling like we're having an impact, when we're hitting those walls day to day. There's this sort of chronic frustration, and that can show up in your body and in your emotions, in your mindset. And I was also thinking about, well, maybe this isn't the place for me. Maybe I need to find somewhere else to go. Thinking about jumping ship. Lauren says, this sounds familiar. Can I get an amen from anybody else who has experienced these things before, or can relate to this, this position in an organization? Yes. Okay. So it's resonating with folks. Yeah. And so there's a way of looking at this where it's like, okay, little old me, I'm early in my career, I'm mid-level, I'm not at the leadership level, so there's nothing I can do, which is certainly a way that I was looking at it. But today in this session, we're going to talk about ways to change your mindset around that, and also to use some tools to navigate it differently. So the first one that I want to talk about is the way we think about leadership. So as I said, we often think about the person at the top of the organization who has the authority to be making decisions and setting the course. And so a lot of times in our minds, leadership equals authority. But I also want to propose that leadership equals influence. So influence is the ability to impact decisions, not necessarily being the person who's making the final decision, but the person who is able to shape that decision by influencing the decision makers. And that is something that is available to all of us, no matter where we are in the organization. This is something that we all need to get good at as professionals if we want to have a leadership impact from where we are. And also when we someday get to that higher level of leadership, we want to have influence in our skill set. We don't want people to just follow what we want to do because of our authority, to just be obedient and get in line. We want to reach their hearts and minds and really get them on board. And so this is a skill that is essential to being a leader, and it's something that we can start cultivating now. It's not a fixed talent, something that you are born with, being good at influencing people. It's actually a skill. And so we're going to break that down and talk about how to approach influence, even in tough circumstances. So you might be thinking, isn't that just playing politics? Ew, gross. Like, I don't want to get involved in politics at work. I want to see in the chat, how do you feel about politics at work? What are some of the things that come up to you, for you when you think about influence and playing politics? My painful day today. Politics is drama. Ew, who wants that? Gotta stay away from that drama. Other things. Unavoidable, says Jennifer. Have to play the politics even though I don't want to. Yeah, we kind of like, we don't want to get in it. It's exhausting. It's drama. We want to keep away from it. Sometimes we want to avoid it. Feels like I'm being fake, code switching. Yeah. All of these things, definitely true. These are how we think about politics at work. But I want us to shift our mindset about this and understand that work is inherently political. So politics at work isn't an icky thing to avoid. It's not drama that we want to steer clear of. It's not, it doesn't mean being inauthentic or being smarmy, or I don't know, navigating something to manipulate others. Politics is a natural part of work. Organizations are places that have limited resources. And so all of us have ideas about how to use those resources in order to achieve our mission. And so coming together to compete around those ideas and those resources is inherently political. And so this is just part of how we do our work. Politics is about wielding influence. It's not about being loud. It's about being strategic. And you might be thinking that politics is often that people get into it for personal gain. But for all of us on this call, mission-driven professionals who really want to have a meaningful impact, we want to get involved in this politics because it's about serving others. It's about influencing the situation so that we can increase the impact and serve our constituents better. So we really want to get in the game and not avoid it. Suzi, do you have any thoughts to share on this?
Yeah, I think, I was thinking about this metaphor, and I think, we're in such a political age, and I think it's thinking about politics less as sort of what we think of as the bad side of politics necessarily, of, the kissing babies and eating corn dogs at the fair, that sort of thing, and thinking about it more in how do you get things done? When you have a functional democracy, how do you negotiate this bill? How do you get this thing done? How you can be strategic about meeting your goals, whether that's your personal goals or your goals for your department or for your position. And I say that as somebody who has always said that I hate office politics and I hate all of that, but a lot of it's about relationship building. It's about consensus building. It's sort of reframing it, that you can still bring your authentic self to work, and still be aware of the politics that go into the workplace.
Yeah, I think Carrie brings up in the chat here, what is meant by being political? Good point, Carrie. It's a difficult time to be using the word politics. And you're right, it means a lot of different things. And we certainly don't mean what we've all been through in the last several months of politics. What we mean is what Suzi said, getting things done, just getting things done at work. And framing it as politics, I think, is something that we want to distance ourselves from. It feels really charged. It's loaded, as you said. But what I'm trying to say is just because it involves getting in there and kind of thinking strategically about how to influence others and who you need to talk to and how you need to shape the message, that is part of being a savvy professional, and it's a part of serving your mission well and having an impact. And so just because some people call that politics, I don't want us to avoid it. I want us to see it as part and parcel of being excellent at our jobs and as stepping up as leaders now. So that's that. And then we want to talk about how oftentimes when we're not at the top of the organization, we sit back and let the leaders set the tone for our relationship with them. And so we want to encourage you to not defer to your manager to shape your relationship, or defer to leaders to shape your relationship with them. It's about taking initiative and responsibility for those relationships from wherever you are. Now, some people call this managing up. That's probably a term that you've heard before. And I think it's a term that's often misunderstood, because sometimes people think managing up means showing your boss how to manage you, or even managing them. But the way that I define managing up is stepping up to take initiative and take responsibility for your relationship with your supervisor or your manager. But I call it leading in all directions in this slide, because these skills are not just about the person who's directly above you. It's about being successful in working with peers, people in different departments, your board chair, your ED. So it's about leading in all directions, not just managing up. So in this session, I might use language that's around your manager, but just know that all of these skills and mindsets can be applied to any relationship that you have, not just the one with your direct manager. So I want you to take a moment, grab a piece of paper and a pen so that you can jot something down here. And I want you to think about, what is something that you would like to influence at work? What's a decision that you would like to have a say in? What is an area that you would like to have more of an impact on what's happening there? And I want you to write that down. And I also want you to note, who are the people who have authority over the final decision? So take a moment to do that. We're going to come back to the scenario in the session. So I want you to have it in front of you. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and pop it in the chat so we can see some of the things that you're coming up with. What is something that you would like to influence at work?
Okay, we have one which is a DEI-based exhibit redesign. Better education programs and hands-on experiences for kids. All good stuff.
Great. It's great that you have something specific in mind, noted in front of you. So keep that in mind as we talk through each of these steps. So we're going to talk through 4 steps to have influence on this situation. And the first step is to reframe your relationship with your manager. And again, I say manager, but it could be whoever the decider is or the authority figure in that situation. So one way of thinking about your relationship with them is to say, they set the tone, I'm under them. Or even sometimes they are a barrier to me getting done what I need to get done, right? But we want to shift the way that we think about that. Instead to, we need each other to get the best results. So they need your talent and your contributions, and you need their resources and their guidance. And in some cases, their capital, their political capital or their social capital within the organization to open doors for you. So in order for you to be successful, you need to be able to reach them. I didn't say you need to be able to like them because it's different. Being able to reach them is different than liking them. And
I, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Suzi.
No. I finish your thought.
I was going to say that you as museum professionals are uniquely poised to think through this question of how to reach your manager. I think that's what you're going to jump in on.
Yes, that's what I was going to. I stepped on your line. Yeah, and I think it's thinking a little bit, we think a lot, whatever we do, we think a lot about audiences, right? We think about, who's going to come to our programs, who's going to look at our exhibits, that type of thing. And it's thinking about your manager almost as your audience, getting to know them. What is your audience interested in? What are they not interested in? What do they like? What do they not like? How do they learn? Are they somebody who needs to read something? Are they somebody that needs to hear something? It's thinking about getting to know them, much like you get to know the people who come to the museum.
Yeah, and so as museum professionals, it's second nature for you to be thinking about all these questions when it comes to your constituents and your visitors. But we need to turn those tools back into the back office and use that same kind of curiosity and the same kind of questions to think about your relationships there. And so what I want you to do is think about your manager as your primary stakeholder. So essentially they're one of your constituents or one of your visitors. Put them in your mind in that way. And we're going to investigate what makes them tick. You need to know about them. Just like Suzi said, you need to know about your visitors. And it's about understanding how they work. Now, Suzi, I think in museum speak, you have a term for this. Yeah.
Well, I think, I am a big practitioner of VTS or visual thinking strategies. So it's a little bit like, what's going on with my manager? It's about, if you look closely at an object or look closely at a work of art, and figure out, again, what makes them tick, what's going on here, is something that, to really, to look closely, to listen. It's developing those same observational skills that we try to cultivate in ourselves and in our audience, of looking closely. If you're looking closely at a painting, and trying to figure out, what is this about? What, how can I more deeply understand? It's the same as applying that to people, and asking, what do I see that makes me say that? Well, I think they're not a morning person. Well, if I go to them at 9 o'clock in the morning, they're not, they're not the most perky, that's data that you can put into of, okay, maybe I will wait until she's finished her cup of coffee before I approach her with a big idea, those types of things. It's taking that knowledge and then applying that knowledge, which again is something that we want to do so much in our teaching, and in the way we interpret objects and present them to the public.
That's such a cool way of thinking about it, Suzi. A person as a work of art, and
yes.
those analytical skills and those museum methodologies that you all are so well versed in, to applying them in a different area.
Yeah.
And all the things that you just mentioned, and particularly the timing of when you talk to someone in the morning, if they're a morning person, these are things that we learn through trial and error with the people around us, right? And so it takes a long time to understand, oh, that didn't go so well, or I shouldn't talk with her then, or she likes things this way. But instead, we want to make these explicit questions. We want to really get conscious about asking these questions and not just pick it up here and there through trial and error, but really put our minds towards figuring out what makes them tick, how they work. So I have 3 key questions for you to ask in order to gain an understanding of that. The first is, what are their communication preferences? So how they prefer to communicate with others and how they prefer to be communicated with. And everybody has different preferences. I'll never forget my first day at the Providence Children's Museum. Somebody was training me. We were walking through the back offices. And as we walked down the education hall, they said to me, okay, if you want to get information to Kathy, you put it on her chair. If you want to get information to Carly, you should put a Post-it on her computer. If you want to get information to Mary, put it in her mailbox. If you wanted to get it to Kelly, send her an email. And so I'm sitting there like writing all these things down. And it's such a great lesson to learn up front as a young professional, that different people have different communication preferences. And one way to look at that is to say, oh my God, what a hassle. Can't we just pick one way as an office? And so we're just going to do things this way. And yes, one way to respond to it would be to be frustrated. But another way to think about it is, okay, well, if I want to reach Kathy and she's the director of education, so that's in my interest to get things that I want to move forward, I want to reach her in a way that's going to work with her and that's going to be successful with her. So I'm going to put those notes on her chair for her to sign. Kathy, if you're on this call, you know I'm right. All right, so the second question is, how do they make decisions? So getting a sense of how they process information and decide a course of action. And this is, again, different for different people. For in my last position, my supervisor, who is the director of the organization, I realized through trial and error that in our one-on-one meetings, if I brought an idea and I said it verbally, like I was thinking we should try doing this, she would have this response that was kind of like very skeptical or overwhelmed. Just kind of like, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know what that would be like or how we would do it. But if I brought the same idea on a piece of paper, particularly in a spreadsheet, because she was a very logical thinker, she would have something to look at, and I could just see her shoulders come down and her have more confidence in whatever the idea was. And so I knew that in order to be successful with her, in order to get her buy-in, that I should present information in that way to help her make decisions. So that's the second question. How do they make decisions? The third question is, what are their goals? This is really important. Understanding what they are trying to achieve. So it might be, if they're the head of department, what are the department's goals? If they are the head of an organization, what are the priorities that are really top of mind for them? And this is really important information because it's going to help you to shape any proposal that you bring to them. We're going to talk about how to do that, but it helps you also to see how your work feeds into theirs and it's going to make you better equipped to set your own priorities. Suzi, can you think of an example of this?
Yeah, you know, I think it's sort of being in tune, and again, if you're being a good observer, as to what their major concerns are. So to give an example, I had a boss who was they were very concerned about the budget, and wanting to balance the budget, and all of those pressures. So if I was going to them with a proposal, say I wanted to increase the salaries of my part-time staff, let's say, if I wanted to increase their hourly rate, I was going to have to get at that concern. I was going to have to address that somehow with, you know, this is going to bring value? How am I going to make more money here? Or, you know, or conversely, you know, you know, are there other things we could be cutting, things that we would not be doing that we can make this a priority? It's sort of anticipating their concerns, so that that doesn't automatically become their objection as to, oh, we can't afford that, we can't afford that. You know, really kind of thinking ahead and anticipating what the objections might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is such a great example, because you had one idea about the importance of increasing the salary of your team. And so you could have gone to that conversation and said, this is important, we have to do this.
Yep.
Which would be totally understandable. Yes,
right.
Because that's the way you see it. You get it. This makes sense. This makes perfect sense. And then it could get shot down right away. Yep. In which case you would go home and complain to your husband and say, I can't believe this. I'm so frustrated. This really needs to happen, right?
Yeah. And that's the, you know, for me, you know, and so the argument could come to me of, you know, I think this is the right thing to do, but that's not, you know, I'm not the one who is doing you know, I'm not the one who is going to be called in front of their boss, which is the director, the board of directors, who's going to say, why is the budget not balanced? So, you know, it is thinking about, you know, it's thinking about anticipating their objections. And then, that the argument that's going to get me isn't necessarily the argument that is going to get them.
Yes,
so
absolutely. Now, sometimes in this kind of situation, it can make you really roll your eyes, because I'm sure with that director, you're like, oh, I know he's going to freak out about the budget. This is definitely going to be about the budget. And, you know, every time I talk with them, this is all about the budget. So this is never going to happen, right?
Yep.
I had a coworker once who had a completely different work style than our director, the same director who liked things in spreadsheets. And this was, my coworker was more of like she was an out in the community kind of person. She could have a conversation with anyone and shape a partnership, bring things in. So she was like moving and shaking. And even though she was having a lot of success, she was totally pissing off the director because she wasn't doing it in a way, like their work styles were not meshing. And so my coworker saw this as a huge impediment and would roll her eyes a bunch about it. She'd be like, oh my God, I have to put things in a spreadsheet. I have to jump through these hoops, you know, in order to present the information to her. And this is so frustrating. And I feel so confined by having to cater to her style. And that is a very understandable way to respond to this. But it's not going to get you what you want. Yeah. If you want more resources, if you want to have an impact on the decisions being made, part of being a savvy professional is understanding how to communicate in a way that's going to get buy-in, how to reach the people that you want to reach. And again, we're so good at doing this when we think about our constituents or our visitors, the people that we serve, but we also need to think about it in terms of our relationships in the back office.
The goal is to get done what you want to get done. They don't necessarily have to buy your argument. You need to make the argument that they will buy. And if your staff gets higher salaries, it doesn't matter, you know, how you get there. I'd love for them to think this is the right thing to do no matter what. But if we can make the argument on their terms, you know, you have to hope, you know, people get paid better, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. And we'll give another example of what this looks like in practice in a moment. But the idea right here is that you need to ask the questions to understand how they work, so that you know how to bring an idea or a challenge to your boss and be successful and to reach them. Alex says, I struggle with this. Tell us more, Alex. Want to hear more about what part of it you struggle with, as we share some more tools and ways to think about this. For right now, I want you to turn back to that piece of paper and think about your manager, or think about whoever the decider, the authority figure is in the situation that you want to influence. And I want you to make note right now of what you know about these three things. What do you know about how they prefer to communicate? What do you know about how they make decisions? And what do you know about what their goals are right now? Just jot down a couple of bullet points.
And I think as people are talking, one thing that Alex says is sometimes being right is more important than being savvy about presenting my case. And I have to say, Alex, I feel that very strongly. It's really hard when you have something that that's very heartfelt, and you want people to feel the same way. Yeah, I hear you.
But it's no good being right and on your high horse and not getting what you want.
That's the hard part. Yep.
You can still be right, but shape that rightness in a way that's going to reach the other person.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about how to do that. But yeah, Alex, it's a great point, because I think we can all relate to that. Feels good to be right.
Yeah.
All right, so what do you know about your manager's communication preferences, how they make decisions, what their goals are? Riza, we'll get to your question a little bit later. It's a good one. Go ahead and share something in the chat. One bullet point that you've written down about those communication preferences or decisions or goals. I want to see what you know already. What have you learned through trial and error of working around and with people? Lauren says, something as simple as learning whether someone communicates better verbally or in writing can be huge. Definitely. Yeah, for another person, it would be the opposite of what my manager's preference was, of having things on paper. Catherine says, put it in writing. Anticipate the what ifs. Deanna says, have a new and temporary manager. So I'm still learning, but my most recent boss definitely liked in-person communication, and the one before was all text. Yeah. Sam asked about adapting to communication preferences during COVID-19 circumstances, which is a great point. That even if you knew before what your manager's communication preferences were, they may have shifted, and they might still be figuring them out and how they work right now with remote work. And so it's a good time to be thinking about this question, because circumstances are different than usual. Lauren says, I've had supervisors that are risk averse. A bit of well-researched reassurance goes a long way. Yes, for some people, having those facts in place to reassure and address their fears is essential. Anything else that you noted? How about goals? Do you feel like you have a good sense of what your manager's goals are? I'm curious if you do. Colette says, I feel I've had the best luck with emailing details, followed by in-person and phone. Lisa says, what if the decision makers don't see eye to eye? Yes, that's a good question. We'll get to that one later too. I'm writing that down. All right, yeah. Do you know what your manager's goals are? I'm curious. And then also, if you don't know the answers to these questions, or you feel like you could have a better sense of what the answers are, how could you find out? I want to hear your ideas in the chat. How could you find out the answers to these questions? Great, we've got some goals rolling in here. So some of you have a sense of what your manager's goals are. So how would you go about finding the answers to these questions? Alex says a one-on-one conversation. Ask them, says Lisa. I prefer open and transparent communication whenever possible. Ask. Yeah, okay, so asking them. Email or call the manager on a time that they have available. Yeah, so set aside some time to have a conversation about it. Let's see, open and transparent. Okay, you guys are up for that. I think another idea might be to talk to someone who is successful with that person. So say Suzi and I are coworkers and I notice she has a really good relationship with our director. I might ask Suzi to have a virtual coffee with me and ask her, so how do you present information to them? I notice you guys have a good relationship. What goes into that? And so talking with somebody about how they approach that relationship could be helpful as well.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, the idea is that let's do this in a way that's not the trial and error over time, because our work is too urgent and too important to wait to figure out how to work together and wait to figure out how to have a leadership influence. Let's do it now. So let's figure these things out now. So I'm going to share with you a tool that is called a personal user manual. It's kind of like when you buy a new electronic device and you open up the box and there's like the card on top that's the quick start guide, and it tells you how to turn the thing on, how to charge it, and how to do like the basic functions. And so the idea is that we could have these as people, a cheat sheet to working with Suzi, the user manual to working with Suzi. And on this in this tool, there are questions like your communication style, how you make decisions. You can count on me to ways that you contribute at work. I'll need your help with ways that you could help me, ways that you can interact with me when I'm stressed that I find actually helpful. So just getting your preferences on paper and sharing those with each other and having this tool to actually think them through and have a conversation about it can be really helpful. So as a follow-up to this session, I will share this user manual with you, and you can use this session as an excuse to have this conversation. You know, say, I went to NEMA, I got this really great tool, I want to talk about it with you so that we can really get in sync with how we work together and so that I can support you better.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say that as a department head, that's something that I would have always welcomed from my direct reports. I mean, and that was something when I came in as a new director of education in Concord, I sat down with all of my direct reports and, you know, and then I also had a lot of part-time staff, and I got to know all of them and spent a good time getting a sense of who they are, because all of the people, this is helpful for me as well. You know, how can I communicate with you? How can I, you know, what do you need? Because oftentimes you are dealing with people who all they're coming from different places, different levels of experience, different approaches. And it's something, it can be, to a certain extent, I think, a two-way street.
That's so good to hear, Suzi, because I can imagine that this would be a scary thing to bring up in a one-on-one and say like, hey boss, can we talk about how we work together? But to hear that you as a manager would welcome that and recognize the initiative in the mutually beneficial sense of this tool is really affirming. Carrie posed a great question here. She had a manager who said that they preferred email, but wouldn't read or respond to it. and be weeks behind. So how do you deal with that when they say that they want to communicate in one way, but it's just not true? And so I would put your Nancy Drew hat on and really get curious and see what actually does work if it's not what they say, and also see who has better results with them and have that conversation with that person to say, hey, I'm really trying to reach this person and get things moving forward with them. I'm not having success with email. I really want to be successful. What advice would you have about that? Yeah. Yep. And Deanna gave you some great guidance there too, Carrie. Awesome. All right. So the next step is to build rapport and trust. So now that you know how they prefer to work, really investing in the relationship. And there's this way of thinking about trust that I really love. And it connects to something that I do with my daughter who's 5. I don't have it in front of me, but I have a mason jar for her, and it has a top with a slot in it. And every time that she does something kind or helpful, like get a diaper for the baby or turn off the TV without turning into a total monster, we put a token in the jar. And when the jar fills up, she gets to have a treat or choose something from her list. And I like to imagine in any work relationship, or really any relationship in life, there is this jar between us. So for Suzi and me, there's a jar between us. And every time that I do something that builds trust in our relationship, it puts tokens in the jar. And every time that you do something that builds trust, it puts more tokens in the jar. And conversely, we could also do things that take tokens out of the jar. And so the goal is to have this really full jar of tokens so that there's a lot of trust between us, so that we have good rapport. And so for you to think about, what is your boss's currency of trust? What is it for them that is a token that you could put into the jar? And so I want you all to think about that for a moment. For your boss, what would their currency be? I want to see it in the chat. And while you do that, Suzi, what would you say?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think about the relationship with the boss that the best boss I've had, and what made our relationship good. I mean, one is that it was a long-term relationship, which I know is not always possible, if you're moving positions. We worked together for 9 years. But it was in that it was a lot of it, our good relationship was established in the first year. And they were somebody who one of the things it was getting to know what the things that they really struggled with was a relationship with our guiding staff, with our instructors. And for me, it was kind of helping to take that off the plate. So that was not something that they had to worry about, that I could manage that relationship, and they didn't have to worry about it. They could focus on the things that they were really interested in. And they were less of a concern. And that was something that it got to the point where I could do this, and I could do it on my own. And she didn't have to worry about it. And that was helpful to her. And that became the basis for our relationship throughout all the years that we worked together, was that we were able to have a good give and take. That we really, she knew that I could handle whatever was thrown at me. And that was really, that's really, it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship, that I can handle things. I can get things done. She doesn't have to worry about it. And then we can build from there. And from there, I was able to get lots of opportunities. I was able to go and present at conferences and travel and, learn all sorts of things, and just have these opportunities to be out there in a way that I don't think I would have if our relationship hadn't been there.
Yeah. So the currencies that you talked about were sort of time and a long track record with each other. Yeah. You talked about her giving you things, delegating things to you essentially, and you showing that you could handle those things.
Can do it.
For
Yeah.
her. And so there's part of that is reliability, part of
Mhm.
that is follow through. And so all those things were the currency that filled up your jar. And because you had a strong trust jar, that meant that there were opportunities for you to grow within the organization, to present. And so it opened up a lot of doors for you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That was paraphrased beautifully.
That's my superpower as a coach. That's what I do. Great. So tokens, reliability and follow through, coming through on deadlines, being competent, taking tasks off their plate. Yes. Okay. So some really great questions coming through. Alex is asking, how do you rebuild a broken trust jar? Alex, is the jar empty or has it been smashed all together? If the jar is empty, you got to ask this question: what are the tokens that need to go in there, and how can I take steps to rebuild the communication? In the scenario I was telling you before about my previous coworker and the director who they had a terrible relationship because they were just breaking down trust because they weren't coming together. And so if this person just would put one darn thing in a spreadsheet, that would just be a couple tokens in the jar, you know? And if this person would just recognize the incredible impact that this person was having by going out in the community and creating these partnerships, that would be a couple of tokens in the jar. And so thinking about what are the tokens and how to build that up. But Alex says, indeed, the jar is broken.
Oh boy.
So we need glue. We need some glue. We need to take some time and care with it. I would say, Alex, in that situation, really reflecting on what you can do to really address it head on. So it's not just about tokens. It's about, let's sit down and have a conversation about where we're going to go from here. Because if the jar is empty, if the jar is broken, nothing's going to get done.
Yeah.
How you work together is essential to impact.
Yep. Yeah. Time for a new jar, I think.
Yeah. And oftentimes it is time to move on. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Kira asks, how can you show your boss that you can handle things? That's a good question. Paula says, I want to handle more and I want that to be recognized. I think that we'll talk about that in a minute. I think that's gonna come up in our next slide. And so make sure that we come back around that and get your question answered, Kira and Paula. Lauren has some advice for you in the meantime. So these are all great ideas about what the currency could be. And I have a few ideas too. So one is to be awesome at your job. We're all awesome at our jobs, right? This we can do. Follow through on what you say you're going to do. Create value for your boss and the organization. And share your talents so they know how to use you best. So really bring what you have to the table. Show up. Be good at what you've been given to do. The second thing is have their back. Have your boss's back. And this includes anticipating their needs and making sure that they're not blindsided by anything. So you're really there to set them up for success and make them look good. Sometimes we resist this. In my last organization, this person would definitely resist the fact that she is there to make the ED look good. But your job is to make sure that the mission succeeds, and that includes making sure your boss succeeds. And so you really got to think about how you can have their back and set them up for success. I was talking with my husband about this last night. He's a second grade teacher, and he was saying that in his case, if there's a behavior or a situation that happens in the class and he knows that the kids are going to go home and tell their parents about it, he makes sure to tell his principal so she's aware of whatever happened, because he doesn't want her first time learning about it to be when she gets a call from a parent. And so that's his way of anticipating her needs, making sure there are no blind spots, showing her that he's got her back, and building trust in the relationship with her. And that means that they have a good working relationship, and that makes his job a hell of a lot easier. So anticipating their needs, no blind spots. So what's something that's coming up that you could get ahead of to show your boss that you've got their back? Think about that and put something in the chat. How could you show your boss that you have their back? I'm going to look at the questions that have come in while you think about that. Yes, we'll be talking, Jason, we'll talk about involving HR in a little bit. Lauren, this is a great comment. I had a boss who asked me to make the agenda for our one-on-one meetings, and I could demonstrate that I was listening when she asked me to do things and highlight the things I was taking initiative on. Suzi, as a manager, don't you love it when your direct report manages your one-on-one meetings?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, because, you know, it's, I mean, you know, certainly not that I didn't want to focus on that. And oftentimes, you know, in the best one-on-one meetings would be when we each would come with an agenda. And the first thing we would do is, you know, okay, I would say, here are the things I want to talk about. And, my colleague would say, okay, here are the things I want to talk about. And you put it together. But it's, yeah, it's great if if you know that these are the things that you want to talk about and these are the things that you want to highlight, and tell me about the things that you're doing, because I don't necessarily know. I don't see necessarily what you're doing all the time. So, feel free to brag, and these are all things that are good for me to know. Wow, I got a great visitor comment on my tour. And that's really something that, I can then pass that along. And that's always really, really helpful.
Yeah. So Suzi, it sounds like you're really inviting us to take control of those, take sure. Initiative in those one-on-one meetings,
absolutely,
and not hang back and wait for you to determine what that dynamic is going to be.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think we're all going to leave this call wanting to work for you.
Oh, please.
There's Kathy. Here's Kathy, my first boss. Most organizations have 2021 budgets coming up. So thinking ahead about your program's budget needs and wants and being ready with that info. Yes, That's a great way to be anticipating the needs and be ready to show that you have their back. Mackenzie says, ask, how can I help? A great thing, maybe unexpected, Suzi, in those one-on-one meetings is for me as your direct report to say, okay, Suzi, what are your priorities this week and how can I help you? Because oftentimes on those one-on-ones, it's like, okay, I need you, you're my manager. Tell me what to do. But to come to that meeting and say, what do you have on your plate and how can I best support you? And if I know what your priorities are this week, then I'm going to know what my priorities should be this week.
Yeah, I had a director, one thing she would always do, we had all staff meetings, it was a staff about 15 or so, and she would tell us all the things she was working on over the next 2 weeks. So we knew what was front of mind for her. Everybody knew, oh, I have this major donor meeting, or I have this grant application due, or, all of these things, or I'm going to be out of the office. So it was really helpful to know first and foremost what she was working on and what, what she had going on. You can then adjust accordingly. Maybe this isn't the week for me to bring this particular topic up, or this is a great time to be talking about that.
So Rita asked, sometimes she asks, what do you need from me? And it kind of falls flat a little bit. And so maybe a different way of asking that is to ask, Suzi, what are your priorities this week? It's kind of like I had a baby earlier this year and people are like, how can I help? And, or let me know if you need anything. Right. And so I'm like, I don't know what to ask this person or even what I could do, but there's a difference between somebody saying that and saying, I'd like to make you dinner one night. What would a good be? And what are your, food restrictions? And so taking an initiative like that in your manager relationship to say like, okay, I know Suzi has this big meeting coming up this week. Suzi, is there anything that I can do to help you be prepared for that? So making it more pointed and less general.
Right. Or, oh, I will take care of that meeting with the educators, and you'll be, so that you can focus on the board meeting coming up or something like that. So,
Awesome. I saw that Kathy just raised her hand. Kathy, are you able to like unmute yourself and speak? I'm not really sure how that works. Feel free to do so. Accident. Oh, well, you know, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this, Kathy, as a manager yourself. Okay. Anywho, so yes, the next thing is to fill in the holes. Okay, so like I said at the beginning, as a young professional, I could pick out the weaknesses of my leaders in my organization and gripe about them to no end. And I realized that we really have this expectation of our leaders to be perfect. You know, hey, this person is the leader of our organization. They should know how to do all this, or they should be thinking about this. But the truth is that leaders are also human beings. And we expect this perfection. We think we could do it better, but nobody's perfect. My 5-year-old is learning this. We talk about this every day, but nobody's perfect, she says. And it's harder than you think to cover all of the things and be all the things as a higher level leader. There's no leader who is crazy good at every element of leadership. Everybody has holes. So instead of pointing them out and getting frustrated about them, how can you think about them as an opportunity for you to step up? So the fact that they're not perfect is actually an opportunity for you. And Suzi, you gave a great example of this before, because you were talking about your relationship with your manager, and she really didn't like or excel at dealing with the docents. In fact, maybe she would put it that way, dealing with the docents.
Yes.
But to you, like, you love that. That was one of your favorite parts of the job.
Yeah.
And so you said, you know, I'd like to do that. I'd love to take that off your plate. And then you showed her that you were good at it, and she knew that it was handled. And so that you could have sat back and said, oh my God, this person is, you know, the director of education and they don't like docents. What the hell's with this? You know, like, you can get in that bitch fest and spiral down. Or you can say, this is an opportunity because I want to be doing more of that. And so how can I approach this in a way to fill the holes so that we can make, you know, be successful and everybody looks good?
Yeah.
Now, this is, again, one of those moments where you might start rolling your eyes, because you might feel like you're covering up for someone else's mistakes, or you're helping them to get away with something. But really, you're doing what's best for the organization, which is you're making sure that things succeed. We'll talk about the extreme cases of that in a moment, and some other questions that came up about like burnout and HR. We'll get to that in a moment. Lauren says, I had a boss in the past who hated working with spreadsheets, whereas I actually enjoy it. Me too, Lauren. It provided a good opportunity to take that task off her plate and demonstrate my value. Awesome. What a great example. And plus, whenever you do fancy things with this spreadsheet, you get to feel like a wizard and everybody's very impressed. And so, yes, that's a great example. Okay, so as you build rapport and trust, think about what that currency is. Be awesome at your job. Anticipate their needs. Show them that you have their back, and step up to fill in the holes. All right, we're on to step 4. Oh, wait, no, we're not. We're thinking for a moment. Think about what one of your manager's weaknesses are. So what's something that usually makes you roll your eyes or complain about them? Like, oh, I can't believe this person stinks at public speaking and or having conversations with visitors, whatever it is. Think of that thing. And I wonder how you can reframe it as an opportunity for you. So think about that for a moment. If anyone wants to share something in the chat, go ahead and do that. I'd love to hear your reflections on it. While you're thinking, I'm going to tell Suzi an example of this for me. So in the last organization that I worked with, the director was somebody who was very visionary, like very good at being in the public. She was also really good at noticing the talent of different staff members and really getting us in the right seats on the bus. And so those are things that I really respected about her. The things that made me roll my eyes, though, were that she wasn't as good at the internal management pieces. So thinking about the staff experience, like what the morale was like in the office, or how we could boost things, how we could manage the performance review process in a way that actually helped people develop and didn't feel like we were watching everyone. And she spent a lot of time managing financials because she had to, but it wasn't her thing. And so I was sort of taking in this whole picture. And at first I thought, well, what the heck is this about? She's supposed to be the leader. She's supposed to have all of these skills. But then I got to thinking about how I really like thinking about the staff experience and staff morale, organizational culture. That was an area I was super curious about. And so I started bringing that up in our one-on-one meetings and saying that I wanted to take on more of that. And it surprised me just how glad she was to get some of those things off of her plate, especially when I said I wanted to do the financial coding of all the invoices that came into the office. Whatever it is that you're a nerd for, somebody else is just, that's not their thing. So they might be happy to pass that along to you. And it gave me some really good information about, it helped me to develop my skills and also to step up as a leader, because when you understand the finances of an organization, talk about a golden key. I mean, that is a way to really have influence. So any examples that came up for you all about a weakness that one of your manager has, and how you can reframe it as an opportunity? It's always a lovely lag.
I know. Hoping your manager's not in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I recognize that these are not necessarily things that we are able to be very open about. Yes. So I hope you're sitting there and thinking about it. And, yes. Making this, the point is, really taking the time while we're here to apply this to your specific situation, because I like you, I've been to a million conferences where I get all these great ideas, I take notes, and then it's just back to business as usual. So we really want to provide space in this session for you to integrate what we're talking about. What if you realize a weakness, but you aren't qualified to cover that base? Sarah, I think one question to ask yourself is, are you interested? Because how could you build the skills to do it if you are interested? And that might be taking it on and getting some mentorship around it, or taking on just pieces of it to start with. But if it's not something that you're interested in, thinking about who could step up to fill that, or what are some creative solutions around it, to, even if you're not the one who's going to take it on, to say, you know what, I'd love to supervise an intern who could take on that project for our department. And so maybe then you get to build your management skills while they get to cover whatever that thing is. So taking the initiative to think creatively and be solutions oriented around it. Colette says, my manager's great, but he's got way too much on his plate. I do my best to add time back into his schedule. Yes, and a great thing to know about your manager is what his goals are. So you can make sure that you're using his time well, and that his time is really getting to go towards his goals. In the example I just gave about my boss, she was spending so much time coding things financially when she really needed to be thinking about development and fundraising. That was her priority. And so by taking those things off of her plate, she was able to focus more on what her priority was. Any suggestions for when your supervisor refuses your offers to help? That's a tricky one. What do you think, Suzi?
I mean, sometimes you can't help somebody who they have to want to be helped to a certain extent. Yeah. I think that's the, most of us, most self-aware people, we know what our weaknesses are. We know where we need help, but not everybody is there. So, I think you can do your due diligence, and that's really all you can do. You can't, make people do things that you don't want them to do. So. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about that situation, and to be sure, sometimes people get territorial over their responsibilities. Yep. And so they don't want to relinquish control, as Riza put it. But I would double down on this building rapport and trust thing, and really showing them that you have their back. in a way that you really want them to be successful and supported. So as much as you can, focus your efforts on making sure that they know that you're not in it for the glory. You don't want to take it away from them so that, you know, that you're elevated above them. It's really about, you want to work towards the success of the whole team and the organization. And so coming to that really genuinely and building a track record around that, I think that's the best you can do. All right, I want to keep us moving forward. So the fourth step, now that you know what their goals are, you know how they make decisions, you know how they prefer to communicate, you are in a position to have true influence. And so you need to use all that stuff that you learned and the trust that you've built with them to wield your influence. And the way that you do that, which we hinted at earlier, is to come forward with your proposal, not in the terms in which you understand it, but in terms that are going to be compelling to the person you're speaking to. So people often get this wrong and they make it about themselves. But it's not important that you get it. You already get it. You need to make sure that they get it, and that they really are reached, like their hearts and minds are changed, so that you can get the thing to move forward and move beyond just being frustrated and stuck. And this is the kind of thing that that you could easily get stuck with, because you could keep coming to your supervisor and say, we have to raise these salaries for my team. And you could keep presenting it in the same way that makes sense to you and keep getting shot down, getting more frustrated, feeling more misaligned with the organization. But it's like beating your head against the wall, really. You got to take a beat and think about, okay, how can I present this in a way that is really going to be compelling and persuasive to the person I'm speaking to? And this is especially important when we think about our own professional growth in the organization and how we present that to our boss. So the best example of that is when you're asking for professional development or you want a promotion. And so this is something that I often see people get wrong. And you can apply these skills and influence to really approach that from a more strategic place. So Suzi, you've been a manager before. I want to pretend that I'm your direct report. And it's time for our, yearly review of me. And I want to pitch myself for a promotion. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, okay, Suzi, I think that this past year was really great, and that I really did some really important work. Remember, I did that program that was really successful, and now we're going to do it again. And I really streamlined how we think about our program calendar. And so I've been working really hard. I work all the time, and I think I really deserve to get a raise and also to have a bigger job title. And have something that's more, instead of program coordinator, being more like a program manager, because I really deserve it. What do you think about that, Suzi?
Well, I think, as I think through that, there's a couple of things at play. One is that I may absolutely buy your argument, that you've done a great job. I've seen all the great work you've done, that this is something, that a move we need to make. But then the next step I have to do, if I'm the director of education and I need to go then to my director to then turn it around, and now I have to make that argument to them. And they're looking at this broader picture as to, why should this person get a title bump and somebody else in a different department gets a title bump? And how do you make that decision? Because sometimes it's different factors. It's things that, I may be 100% in, but then I have to then turn around and make that decision, make that argument to somebody else. And that's something to think about, and something to even think strategically about. You're not just necessarily having to influence me, but you've got to think a level up or even 2 levels up, depending on how large and bureaucratic your organization is.
Yeah, that's an important perspective to have in mind when you prepare for a conversation like this.
Yeah.
I was on your side of the table with my direct report, who was early in his career when he came to me to ask for a promotion. And he his argument was really around, I deserve this. You know, I've been working hard and I deserve this, which is true. You know, he had been working hard. And I remember him saying, you know, I'm really not able to live the lifestyle that I want. And I buy frozen vegetables and I would like to buy fresh vegetables.
Right.
And, you know, my heart went out to him in that moment. Because that's very much true, but it's not the compelling way to pitch yourself for a promotion. And so two things about the mindset around this, and then I'm gonna ask you for a promotion in a different way, and we'll see how. One thing is that I deserve it is not a reason to get promoted. The reason to be promoted is that you're going to make something possible for the organization. You're going to have an impact. You're going to be stepping up in some way beyond the scope of what you've been doing before. And so it's something about, it's about the scope of the job. It's not like I deserve it. And the other piece is, my brother said this to me once, and I still kind of think about it. He says, when you get a raise, it's not about the work you've done. It's about the work you're going to do. And I think that's a really helpful way to think about this, because yes, to be sure, like, bring my evidence about my track record, but really it's about what happens from here. It's not that you're compensating me for the work I've done before, but it's the work moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's often a little bit about retention too, of, you know, if I can give you a better promotion or give you additional money, you know, because I don't want to lose you to the museum down the street. So.
Yeah. Okay, I realize we're losing time here. So, okay, so Suzi, I know that one of your goals as the head of the education department is to be creating more partnerships with schools. But I also know that you spend a ton of your time managing our daily program calendar and coordinating the staff who are going to run those programs. And so I'm thinking that if I could actually take that off your plate, it would give you more of an opportunity to focus on the things that are really going to move the dial for our department's goals. And so I want to talk with you about stepping into maybe a larger position, something like the program manager, where I'm overseeing the program calendar so that you can focus on those larger goals that are really going to bring in more revenue in terms of school visits, but also enhance our connections in the community.
Yep. And see, that what that argument does is then now, if I have a director who is very concerned about the budget, I can then go to them and say, well, if I move Carole Ann into the program manager and she takes this on, I can spend more time on developing this, and this can net us, you know, X number of dollars in revenue. So it brings it down to that bottom line that makes it, you know, makes it an argument that I can then take to, okay, we want to grow the department, you know, we want to serve more people, you know, and this is how we can do it, and this is how it will pay for itself.
Yeah. So phrasing it in a way that it's about how it's going to make things better for you, not how it's going to make things better for me. It's still true. It's going to make things better for me. I want that job. I want that title. I want a bigger salary. I want that responsibility and to grow, but I'm not going to use those as the argument to you. I want to tell you how it's going to be great for you. That's influence in action. Okay. We got to skip ahead a little bit because, we're running out of time, and we got to talk about all the tricky situations that we encounter. And so we're gonna get here to the but. So to be sure, using these strategies can really get you into a place where you have a strong working relationship, you have mutual respect, you're able to be a leader and influence from wherever you are. But you can also hit brick walls. You can be working with somebody who doesn't want to relinquish control, who is really leading from a place of fear and authority. And what happens when you hit those brick walls? So one thing that might happen is that you disagree with your boss. So you just can't get on the same page. And Suzi, have you had experience with that ever?
Yes, I have had experiences with that. And it's, you know, where there are these conflicts of, you know, where, you know, I want to do X and they want to do Y, and, you know, it's not quite compatible. And you know, I think that there are times when sometimes you need to cut the cord. And it's a hard thing, you know, it's hard to say that, you know, especially because museum jobs are not always easy to come by. But there are relationships, there are times when things cross a line. And I think that those are things that you know, we love museums, but they're not all of our identity. And I think that you need to think strongly about, you know, if this is starting to bleed over into your personal life, it's, you know, you know, there are, you know, if you're in a toxic relationship at work, that can then affect every single job that you do, and you have to deprogram yourself. And that's something to really think about. Sometimes the glass needs to be, you know, the mason jar is going to be shattered. It's time to find a new one. So.
Yeah, and that's a tough reality. Somebody asked a question about HR, and a lot of museums don't have an HR person, or the one that they do has 6 other jobs. And so we know that HR is really under-resourced. And so if there's a toxic dynamic in terms of you and your boss, if there's an abusive dynamic, which is common. I mean, I talk with so many clients who are in working with an abusive manager. Those situations are really, really difficult, especially when we don't have support within the organization. And I find that when we're mission-driven professionals, we tend to power through, you know? We take it in stride because we're serving our mission, we care about the cause, and so we tend to overstay in those situations. But the important thing to remember is that there are huge costs to staying. Your confidence will take a hit working with somebody like that. It's going to show up in your body somehow in terms of pain, anxiety, depression, mental health. It's going to show up, and that's real. And so you got to take a moment and think about, okay, what are the levers that I can move to influence this situation? What are the hills that I really want to die on? Where do I want to pick my battles? As Riza says, some things are just not worth the investment and the energy. But also to really recognize when things have crossed the line and you're not just helping the organization and your manager be successful. Instead, you're doing their job for them, or you're being severely undercompensated, you're burning out, or you're in an abusive or toxic work relationship. I'm happy to answer more questions about that. I want to keep moving so that we can wrap up on time, but I will hang around and keep addressing the Q&A after we finish our time here. So on that note, I want you to think back to the decision that you want to influence, the thing that you wrote down, and really think about how you can effectively influence the person making the decision. So how can you use information about their communication preferences, how they make decisions, what their goals are, to make your argument or to present it in such a way that it has the format, the evidence, the words, and the timing that are really going to be compelling and persuasive to the person. In other words, how you can step up to lead, take initiative for this relationship, and really influence what's going on so that you can have a meaningful impact. I'm going to give you a worksheet that actually walks you through these steps and the questions to ask yourself so that you can, consciously think through it a couple of times, and then this process is going to start to feel more second nature. So Suzi and I want to say, above all, that you guys have got this. You are in a unique position to really excel at influencing and leading from all levels, because you have these incredible tools that you apply to thinking about how you reach your visitors and how you engage people. So instead of feeling stuck, frustrated, like things are out of your control in the back office, let's switch our mindsets around the things that we talked about today, that you can influence things, that you need to step up to influence in order to serve your mission better. And that you need to take initiative and responsibility for these relationships, and get in there and use these skills to really lead from any place in an organization. And why is leadership so important for all of us, Suzi?
I mean, because it's how we get things done. I mean, it's, I think that, museums, I mean, we have so many challenges facing us right now. And I think in order for us to be stronger organizations, we need this, and we need to be thinking about it and talking about these topics. And, the museum field is filled with just absolutely brilliant, interesting people. And I think if there are ways we can apply those skills to be better leaders wherever we are, whether, from all different levels, and in all different organizations. And I think, we can do this, I think we have to, if we want to come out of the other side of all of this as a stronger field and stronger organizations.
Yes. And I've talked with so many of my clients who are museum professionals who have incredible skills and perspectives, passion, they're purpose driven, and they're called to leadership. And we can't wait for them to get into those higher level positions to become leaders. We need them to be leaders now from wherever they are. Not only we need that, but they need that in order to sustain their work, because putting myself back in that place of the young professional feeling stuck and frustrated, I wasn't going to last. It's not sustainable. And so learning how to become a savvy leader now enables you to build those skills, exercise them, have an impact. And so when you do get those formal leadership positions, you're ready to roll. So as we wrap up today, we have a couple of calls to action for next steps for you. And that starts with Suzi.
Go ahead. So here is my contact info. I'm on LinkedIn, and there's my Gmail account. I'd love to continue these conversations, and I see this as an opportunity. Oftentimes we have some mentorship in the field, but there's always more opportunities. So please, feel free to send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk about leadership, about museums, about museum education, or art and history, or anything. And I'd love to talk to you guys too, because I think that we can all learn from each other. I'm a Gen Xer, and I know I learn all the time from people who are millennials and Gen Z. And I think that there are ways for all of us to continue that conversation. So as much as we can learn from each other. So please feel free to, and I'll pop it in the chat as well, if you'd like to keep in touch and just chat or have a Zoom coffee or any of those things. I'm happy to be here.
I just popped into the chat a link, but it was the wrong link. So do the one that I just sent there to get the materials from the session in terms of your next steps. So the takeaway tools, the user manual, and a worksheet for thinking through the steps of influencing others. And also it has the key ideas from the session today. I also have some free resources that I want to invite you guys to access. I send out an email twice a month called the Strategic Leaders Toolbox that has tools and resources for advancing your career and leadership. And once a month, I have something called the Leadership Lab, which is a free workshop where we hop on the phone and take on a different topic each month. And it's fun. Many of you have been there before. It's a way to think about your professional development. And I, again, give you some practical tools and tips to walk away with. And then I'm a coach too. I work with lots of museum professionals, including awesome people like Suzi and others who I see on the call here. So I invite you to reach out about working together to enhance your career path and your leadership.
And I want to just say something too, is that one of the things when I worked with Carole, I'm just going to put in a brief plug, is that she we so infrequently as museum people ever ask the question about what it is that we want as people and as professionals. And this was an opportunity to do that, to really think deeply about what I want to do. What I want to do when I grow up. And I think we don't do a lot of that in the museum field. And I really do encourage you to take advantage of Carole Ann's wisdom and she's so thoughtful, and she gets museums on a really, really deep level. So I encourage you to connect with her.
Thanks, Suzi. Yeah, so I'll hang around if you have questions. Here's how to contact me as well. As you can probably tell, I love talking about things like this, and so does Suzi. So please do connect with us on LinkedIn or reach out to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, and thanks to Nima for giving us this session today.
Thank you all.